Okay, welcome everyone. I am Ed Biden. I'm the co-founder of Hustle Badger, and this is the call about finding a job in today's market. I'm joined by Chris, Tom, and Ahmed, who are going to talk. Well, Tom and Ahmed are going to talk a little bit about their personal journey of getting a job in recent weeks and how they did that. And then Chris, who is the founder of a company called Talentful, is going to tell you a little bit about Talentful and give us some industry perspectives on what he's seeing in the market. I'm going to give each of them about 10 minutes to chat through so that we still have plenty of time for you to ask questions. If you do have questions, feel free to dump them into the chat. If I can, I'll get round to them. Otherwise, I'll kind of, we'll save them for the Q&A. We'll see how it goes. As you can tell from the setup, this is all very casual. This is all very informal. So help us out, but also have a good time and give us feedback or questions or whatever as we go along. So with that said, final piece of housekeeping. If you're not on the panel, please stay on mute just for the moment so everyone else can hear. And I'll now ask the panel to introduce themselves. Ahmed, maybe we'll start with you.
Cool. Hi. Well, nice to meet you, everyone. I'm Ahmed. I grew up in Cairo and I moved here just under 10 years ago. I've been in product for like about 5 years, maybe. And I joined Deel recently as a senior PM for like US Payroll. And before that, I was in a company called Job and Talent, and I was a head of product leading about 3 teams. And my credentials in job hunting are pretty big. So I navigated 3 difficult job hunts. 1, breaking into the MBA, breaking into product after my MBA without a product background. 2, a pandemic layoff. And 3, a recent restructuring from Job and Talent. So I know the process relatively well. And I'm happy to be here.
Thanks very much, Ahmed. Tom.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tom. I'm 10 days into my journey at checkout.com. So I'm going to be I am the product manager for our reporting and analytics platform. So before this, I was working at OMG, which is a marketing agency, working on kind of similar internal tools. And then before that, I was at Meta, originally with a sales background, which is perhaps not the most usual route into product. And so I was there for about 7 years, and towards the end of my time there, I kind of gradually transitioned into product and where I am today. So I'm happy to be here.
Awesome, thank you. And Chris, do you want to give a quick intro as well?
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Talentful. We're a global RPO who help clients like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, and actually Checkout hire. So you might come across some of our people, Tom, at some point. We also run one of the largest communities for talent acquisition leaders, a community called Hire. And it's a really interesting view on the trends and how people are delivering hiring plans are thinking about the market. So hopefully I can share some of that stuff with people. Prior to all of this, I led talent for companies like Shazam and Audible. I'm from the UK, but I live in the US. I've been in the US for about 4 years now. So hopefully can give some perspective on both sides of the pond as well. Happy to be here and hopefully can be helpful.
Awesome. Thanks very much, everyone. Great. Well, look, without further ado, we're going to kick into it. Ahmed, you've just scored a brand new role at Deel. I know you ran a very proactive search to get that. Tell us what you did.
Cool. So I mean, one, I used a lot of your help personally, but besides that, I wrote some notes. I'll be a little bit more structured just to get us through this. But generally, I would say like there's maybe 3 different chunks. First, like how do you landscape? How do you understand which orgs to go for? How and when? Then there's like what happens once you get your foot in, getting your foot in the door, and then what happens after you get your foot in the door. So I mean, when I started my search, there was basically the first thing that I did is like I went out to understand like or do something what I would call like an interest versus market reality calibration, right? Like, which is basically who are the organizations that are interested in you? Who are the organizations that are you interested in? Are they currently hiring? What is the overlap between what you're interested in and what is interested in you, which is basically kind of like ideally the best place to be.
So you plotted out like how many, like in a big spreadsheet somehow, all these companies in this way, or how did you do that?
So I mean, I did a few. So there are places where I had a spreadsheet of the orgs that I was interested in. And there are times where I like sort of moved it over to Notion later on. But in the beginning, because I started an interest in fintech and obviously I knew the basics, but like there are a lot of orgs that I didn't know. So I think I was just like chuck the names into the spreadsheet and maybe sometimes also add some LinkedIn links of people that maybe I can target or via cold emails or in-mails, or like maybe I have second connections with, so that in the future, as I prioritize, can reach out to.
Amazing. Sorry, continue.
Yeah, cool. But yeah, while you're calibrating your interest and what the market actually kind of values you as, there's also like another method to like calibrate that. So you've got your mentors, your peers, who can help you kind of realistically understand what you can aim for, right? So it's like, that was very helpful. The second part, which is prioritizing the orgs that you see in front of you, right? So let's say that you have a list of 50 things, like 50 organizations, some of which are organizations that you want to target significantly, and others are organizations that you're just seeing in the market via OTA or LinkedIn that are hiring. I think you want to tier these organizations into like what you think are your top, call it tier one, or like sort of option A opportunities, then B and C. And it's ideal that you try and get a sense of where you would be like a top 1%, a top 10%, or like a top 25% candidate, because that also impacts the way that you want to target these organizations and how realistically you want to invest in them, right? So there are organizations that maybe you don't have the right credentials, or roles that you don't have the right credentials for. So these are like things that you have lower probability, and there are things that you're like a very overqualified candidate for, and that also help you kind of think whether that's what you really want to reach for, or is that something that you want to have as a backup plan. So that's also upfront was very helpful. And the last thing is like knowing what really matters upfront to help you navigate your trade-offs, right? So I knew that like I wanted a high growth company, I wanted fintech or fintech adjacent, and I wanted strong product leadership. And I was more than happy to compromise on being a product leader, and not compromise, but just like let go of my leadership role and become an IC. And I was happy to be very flexible in scope. So I was not like sort of hell-bent on being in payments or being in UX and UI. I was very open to just joining a journey and a company that is growing, and a leader or a set of leaders that I can learn from. I'll pause here before I move from landscaping to like how do you get your foot in the door? But if there are any questions, or Ed, do you have any more things that you want to expand on?
Yeah, and just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, then please feel free to put them in the chat. And as I say, if we'll either get around to them in the conversation, and I'll kind of drop them in, or once we go into Q&A mode later on, then we'll pick them up. Okay, super interesting. So I understand you've got your like long list of companies. You start to kind of capture notes, LinkedIn profiles about them. You've got a separate tab in the spreadsheet, which is mentors, peers who are helping you calibrate. And on that basis, you're starting to kind of rank the organizations on which ones are your target ones. Tell us a little bit about, once you've identified then companies that you were looking for, were these all companies that had open roles or not?
Some of them yes, and some of them no. So the ones that didn't have open roles, so I'll give you an example. So Google is a good example. And Google, maybe when I was looking, hasn't posted a role in London for like almost 3 years. So that automatically turned it off from like maybe what could have been a priority number 1 to like a priority 3. Because realistically, I don't want to technically waste my time trying to like find warm intros and understand the organization for an org that is currently just not hiring in Europe or like London in specific. So that hopefully answers the question. That like basically the hiring activity. And there are organizations that I was not maybe aware of, or like wasn't really thinking about, that I like took maybe from a priority 3 to a priority 2 or 2 to a 1, depending on their hiring activity.
Okay. Sorry, go on.
No. There are questions in Slack in the channel, so I'm not sure if you want to prioritize any of them.
And also, so yeah, Shahid is asking, like, did you use LinkedIn to help to understand how well you were matched to the role?
Yeah, so like assuming that you have your list of companies and kind of are prioritized, then there's trying to get your foot in the door. And here, knowing the organization inside out is very helpful because you can see which PMs are there, what the seniorities are, and what is the path of each PM into the company. And you can kind of see whether they have similar experiences to yours, like what is the average years of experience of a senior PM that recently joined? Is it like, do they consider senior PMs to be people with 3 years of experience? Is it like 15 years of experience? So that benchmarking is super helpful to understand, one, like, are you qualified for that type of seniority, but also generally what type of backgrounds does this organization in specific look for? Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay, great. Let's talk a little bit. I know we've got other questions there. I just want us to move on a little bit further in your search. So you've got your target companies, you've worked out how you're going to reach out to them. How did you then do approaches? Were these cold applications? Were you trying other tactics?
So, I mean, I've tried, I think the theme of the search is like leave no stone unturned, right? So I've tried everything from warm intros to cold reach outs to just generally cold applications. And the hierarchy starts with like, do I have someone on the inside? Can I reach someone on the inside and I get in touch with that person? 2, if I don't, then can I reach someone like that? Maybe we have similarities or like stuff in common that I can reach out to cold, maybe a previous organization, an educational institution, etc. And the third is like the cold application. And I think that's basically the step or the sequencing that I would follow. But generally, I didn't also like always wait. Like if I saw a role, I just apply directly and see where it goes. And if I get a ding, then maybe like a warm intro helps in the future. But also, I think that in this market, I wouldn't necessarily wait a lot until like you put an application in, if you don't have a warm intro directly.
Okay, amazing. And when you're doing those warm intros, or you're not doing just an open application, do you have any kind of particular tactics or tips for making that work?
It's, to be honest, it's just like using your network, right, and trying to maximize the best out of that. So first, obviously, like the highest monetizable network is people that you really worked with because they're super willing to help you. Then you've got your mentors, and then you dive, like you move slightly further into maybe people that like you studied with, or people that you have shared educational institution with, or like shared previous company with. But it's just trying all of these and like figuring out what works. And at the end of the day, in warm interest, some people are really used to the process and maybe they have themselves networked before, and some people don't. And I think you also need to like identify very quickly whether that person is happy to help and have a philosophy of paying things forwards, or is it gonna be difficult, and just trying to focus on people that are willing to help with multiple intros, rather than people that are maybe just a bit more reserved on that front, because that would waste a lot of your time. So just find the 1 in 10 that is willing to like make 10 intros for you, and just like try and utilize that and be as thankful as you can be. But also understand that some people are willing to help a lot, and some people are just maybe too busy at that point in time to be able to help, and maybe just cut your losses there and move on.
Great. And then for when you're asking for an intro, what are you actually asking people to do? Or what's the kind of the request you're making of people?
It depends, right? Like I think if I have a huge trust and there's like good leverage within that relationship, I'm quite straightforward. I'd be like, hey, I saw an opportunity. Would you be open to talking about it and like making an intro? If it's maybe what I would call like a cold outreach on LinkedIn, then it's going to be mostly about their experience in the company, or maybe giving advice over like my CV or like my experience, to have that initial conversation and not necessarily focused on the intro itself.
Great. Okay. Tell us then, so you've got your intros. Tell us a little bit then, like how well did those convert into interviews, and what can you tell us about the interview kind of process from there?
I think I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but I think intros at least converted 50%. So maybe let's say I got 4 referrals and I got interviews at the back end of 2, and like 2 of them didn't work, didn't even get like an initial screening. So that helps just to understand what it is. But then from there, I think when you get the first interview, I think you need to be, I learned to be very quick on understanding what they really care about, right? Like job descriptions in most cases can sadly be just a laundry list of things, and you need to like hone in quickly on what they're not willing to compromise on as a hiring manager or as a hiring team, and what they're happy to like just let go of. And in here, like the recruiter is really your biggest asset, right? Because the recruiter is incentivized to help you sort of like get the role. So you're asking the right questions to yield what really the hiring manager cares about is super important, so that you're able to tailor your pitch, tailor your experience a little bit better. And you should also be able to ask these questions directly to the hiring manager, right? Like one of the questions I ask is like, what do you find in the requirements, or like what you're looking for, what do you find is coachable, and what you want the candidate to be able to hit the ground running from the start? And I think I found that question to be super helpful to understand that maybe they'd say like, oh, I want someone that has like previous experience in ML, and I know that I don't have that. And at that point in time, I'd save both of us time up front, rather than like try and sort of bend my experience into maybe a shape that is not quite suitable, or like that's not quite a right fit. So I think understanding what they care about is super helpful. And the third kind of channel in trying to do that is just finding an internal resource that is able to like maybe contextualize slightly for you what is happening inside the organization or inside that particular team, right? Example would be like, oh, like this team has maybe a gap in this area, and that's why they're really focused on getting someone with that particular skill. Or somebody like basically the last 2 PMs left quite quickly, and they're over-indexing on someone that has the intention to stay in that team for like the long term. So like also that's super helpful for you to understand.
Awesome. I can keep asking you questions all evening, but I know we've got a couple of other people to chat to. We've got Q&A later. So one final question, like which resources, materials did you use to kind of support your search, or did you find useful?
So I think in terms of how to manage like a job search from a very, very high level, I think the 2-hour job search is incredible. And in terms of like preparation, I think I got an offer, I can write it in the chat later. An Exponent were pretty good in just learning. One, I got an offer, helped me get someone that is able to do mock interviews with me. And the second thing is Exponent just helps you understand what are the basics of case prep for large tech, which is still very useful and translatable to the rest of like the scale-ups that have some form of semi-structured hiring process for product people.
Super, great. Yeah, if you've got any links that you can stick in the chat, I'm sure everyone would appreciate them. Amazing, thank you very much, Ahmed. Let's not skip a beat then, head straight over to Tom. Tom, you've recently joined checkout.com. Tell us about that. Where were you before? And yeah, how did you get your new role?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really tough market out there, so hopefully we can help everyone on the call. Previous to this, I was OMG, which is a marketing agency. We were building a lot of internal tools for our internal users to use to target advertising against. And we really needed to rebuild that platform, and that's a lot of the work that's helped me kind of get to this reporting and analytics role. Prior to that, I was at Meta. I was there for 7 years, I mentioned at the start, and I was working on their programmatic advertising business called the Audience Network, where crazy growth. When I joined, it was like a brand new product, and 7 years later it was like a $2.5 billion a year revenue business, like insane. So when I was kind of looking around for my next role, I wanted to keep kind of things quite broad, so I wasn't turning down too many candidates, but also wanted to kind of focus in terms of what I was really driven by. So similar to Ahmed's list, to be honest, I was looking for something that was really tech and product focused and forward. I wanted a company that was expanding rapidly, both in terms of revenue and people. I was wanting to learn or join a scale up. I'd come from very much of an enterprise background. And then ideally, I wanted to be in fintech. I've had an interest in this space for a long, long time. And it kind of felt like the right opportunity to make that move. Thankfully, I kind of hit all of those. Checkout is very late stage scale up, but it's not done too badly. So yeah, in terms of my approach, took a similar approach in terms of tiering the companies, A, B, and C. The tier A were the ones I really had my eye on. And obviously kind of tier C's were ones that I was very much interested in, but I wanted to learn a bit more about those. And then it was really about managing that whole funnel through kind of prospecting, to networking, to applying, to interviews, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's kind of high level how I approach things.
Amazing. When you were kind of creating your list of prospects, did you just like add all the companies you knew to that, or did you somehow kind of systematically scan the market?
A bit of both. So there are ones off the top of my head. Obviously, you could have the likes of Google on there. I did things like Googling the top 100 scale ups in London. Like I wanted to stay in London, so that was pretty important. And a few of them I knew. Deel was on the list. I know they're remote first, but kind of you can do it from London. And a lot more of those I really wanted to look into. So I actually Googled each one of those and determined if I wanted to kind of move up to a B or an A list. And then otherwise I was doing outward communications to recruiters who are able to bring roles to me. Ultimately, there's one of me. There's lots of recruiters. If more people can do the job for me, then all the better.
And the finding good recruiters, was that through word of mouth? Were there any lists out there?
It was word of mouth, actually, Ed. So when I started this process, I reached out to you. You do, I believe, mentoring through the Hustle Badger kind of network, and you were able to introduce me to a few. So that was really helpful. To be honest, through the process, I then got to know more. And every time I got a name, it's no harm reaching out to them for a 15, 30-minute conversation. You don't know what it leads to.
Amazing. So these calls, then you speaking to recruiters and so on. Were you doing kind of cold approaches, warm intros, as well as open applications, or?
So I was doing everything. So I kind of looked into the numbers. I applied for these are broadly accurate. I applied for about 60 roles over a 2-3 month period. A third of those I got no response at all. Some of those did eventually come back once I got the role, but in any case, no response straight away. A third of those were just straight declines. Like I'm assuming that whatever software was being used just scanned my CV out. And a third of those led to a recruiter call or an interview or whatever that might be. So I learned pretty quickly that applications I would get screened out quite quickly. And actually what I needed to rely on was my network, my existing network, and expanding that. So I started going to Hustle Badger events. Shreyas, like a kind of PM influencer, was in town. I popped along to one of those. And that really helped to, when I was out of the job market, stay kind of switched on in that space, but also make a few more connections. So that was really helpful. Actually, there was one that out from the Hustle Badger event, I was then, it kind of led to an interview, which was obviously really helpful.
Great. Tell us a bit more. How did you prepare for the actual interviews?
For the interviews itself, so yeah, I heard the recommendation for Exponent. There's Diana, I think her surname is Yu, on LinkedIn. Similar content, it is free, but I highly recommend Exponent as well. And then just practice. I was like brushing my teeth and thinking things through in my head, doing it in front of the mirror, like if I was, before a call or whatever. I really need to just like stay in that mindset of improving my answers over and over again. I know on Exponent you can be matched up with an actual product manager who can do that with you. I've for myself found that like I was able to practice without that personally. But also through the process, you get better at refining your story, right? So, I'm not a fan of necessarily applying for stuff that I I'm not interested in, but there are obviously varying levels of interest. And so those kind of tier B, tier C ones were really important for improving my overall interview techniques.
Okay, great. We had a question in the chat which is about like, how did you respond to people asking you what your expected salary was?
Firstly, I would say, what salary are you offering? Just turn it straight back to them. More often than not, they're pretty open with that. And my experience is that that's not really to catch you out and so that they can underpay you. It's more that they've got a pay band in mind. So they want to make sure that your expectations meet theirs. I'd then also kind of dig into that. So certainly with checkout, I was able to, I think they offered me they told me what the kind of middle of the band was. I then said, can you tell me what the maximum is? There was kind of a bit of back and forth, but all in good jest. And then once I'd got the offer, I was able to negotiate on that as well. So I would very much say, don't be afraid of negotiating. There are services like levels.fyi offer one, where you pay them, to be fair, quite a lot of money, but I think they guarantee a 2x return on that. But you can have a bit of back and forth between the recruiters and ultimately get you a better offer that you deserve.
Awesome, fantastic. And again, kind of like final question, any particular resources, recruiters, sort of people you'd recommend to help through the search process?
Absolutely. So shout out to Hustle Badger, the effective job hunting course, I think it's called. Really helpful when I talk about kind of massaging that funnel. It really goes through every single stage and how you can improve it and get the most out of it. Talked about coming from a sales background. In there is kind of a template that you can use for a bit of a CRM to write down who you've reached out to, when you've reached out to them, when you should message them again to catch up again. That's really helpful. I'd also say LinkedIn Premium, I think it's £30 a month in terms of like ROI of you get a new job that can pay you hopefully a lot of money. That's really critical in having that outreach. When I talk about kind of the application process being not so successful, I had similar hit rate of like, if I could reach out to someone, I'd probably get a response 50% of the time. And I would say 80% of that time, it probably leads to at least a recruiter call. So it definitely helps you kind of fast track that application.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks very much, Tom. I'm sure there's going to be a bunch more questions for you, but let's pull Chris into the conversation. Chris, tell us a little bit more about Talentful.
Yeah, so Talentful is essentially a RPO for the world's fastest growing and ambitious technology company. So we essentially provide recruitment teams to go in and deliver against the hiring goals of a business over a period of time. So a company might come to us and say, we have 1,000 hires to make this year across engineering and product, and we'll put a team together to go in and hire on a subscription basis. So I think the interesting point of view I have for people in this audience is, in my own business, we have hundreds of recruiters recruiting across both the US and Europe for technology businesses. So we measure stuff like live open jobs at our customers. We and close rates, offer acceptance rates, interview time to hires, all that kind of stuff, which I guess is anecdotal, but also grounded in real-time statistics. And then we also have the hire community, where we have 12,000 talent leaders across the world. So these are the people that are getting the hiring direction from the board of these companies and making it happen and executing. So we have data from both of those camps. So hopefully I can bring some of that to the audience here.
Amazing. And what are some of the kind of most interesting trends that you're seeing? I know I reached out to put you onto the panel after I saw you posting on LinkedIn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think the interesting thing is that there's been a real shift over the last few years. I think volatility is one of the main themes. And that's coming out in a lot of different data points. So we actually ran a report in the community last month called the State of TA, where we interviewed hundreds of TA leaders across the technology space. And what the data showed, we looked at the demand and the open job volume for the last few years. And what it's looking like is hiring volumes have been relatively flat since January 2022, with some small peaks. But interestingly, when you look back at pre-pandemic levels, overall hiring demand was lower in January 2022 than it is now. And I actually think that most people don't feel that way. They feel like the market's much worse. But I think what actually happened is in that post-pandemic boom, it felt like every company was hiring like mad. Well, what's happening now is hiring's happening in very specific and focused pockets. Not every company is benefiting from the same growth. And companies are taking a very careful and considered approach. And when we did see growth, it's mainly in the SMB and startup segments. I think another trend that's really driving the behavior of people in the market and the reservedness is that they don't really have a lot of ability to forecast. We interviewed talent leaders and 65% said that they can only plan 6 months or less ahead. So what that's meaning is they can't push the button, they don't have much confidence, and they're looking for different ways to staff their teams. That could be contractors, fractional, it could be vendors. Because they can't see too far ahead, I think they're being creative with how they staff their needs and deal with the projects. So we're seeing a shift from permanent employees to contract and fractional, which is a pretty interesting shift.
Interesting. And are people looking for those fractional and contractors through the same channels as they're looking for permanent people, or are they looking in different places?
Absolutely, yeah. So job postings, mainly they'll be advertising, if it's a contract role or a permanent role, and recruiters will be headhunting for these specific profiles as well. So if you are interested in fractional work, I'd make it clear on your profile that that's something that you are interested in.
Yeah, awesome. So as well as the kind of structure of the market changing a little bit, do you think employers are looking for different skill sets or capabilities? And I guess the kind of big question here, is like everyone I speak to is worried about, are they building AI products? Are they using AI in their work? Right? Is that something you see people overall hiring for, or is it still the fundamentals that people care about the most?
I think there's definitely a buzz around AI and LLM experience, and we're obviously seeing a huge amount of competitiveness in those areas. But I do think overall the market is looking for the same skill sets. The issue is that companies have this directive to do more with less. So there's been an emphasis and a shift towards efficiency, productivity, quality, and I think that's where we're seeing the demand for roles drop. In certain places, because they're looking at how can they get someone who's got multiple skills versus just one. They're being more careful when they're hiring. They're not over hiring. There's this real kind of recency bias, I think, for a lot of leaders, where they've gone through this like emotional trauma of over hiring over the last few years and having to lay off their teams. So I think that's playing in, and not to be underestimated, on how much of an impact that's had on companies. They're being a lot more careful when they open new roles or apply new budget to headcount. But I think overall the same skill sets are in demand. There's maybe a bit more focus on AI, but I don't think it's like drastic. Yeah,
super. And are you, are there ways that you can see that job seekers can position themselves really well for a search, or is there advice you give to people who are going through a job search?
Absolutely. And it was really great to hear Tom and Ahmed's experience, because there's a lot of things that resonate, and I think that they were doing absolutely perfectly, to be honest. But I think that sometimes it can feel quite daunting when you're thinking about running a search. It's not really what you do day to day. It seems like a bit of a dark art. But I think about your job search, and I think most people here are familiar with go-to-market. Think about it as your own personal go-to-market strategy, right? You want to understand who your target is, to define your USP, and think about how you're going to go to market and engage and convert your prospects through a funnel. And I think that's really what you want to focus on. And a lot of the stuff's been covered really, but first of all, really understanding who you're looking for, like what kind of job, your ideal job profile, instead of ICP, I guess. Being really targeted and structured, I think, really helps. As Tom mentioned, splitting your search into passive and active channels. So passive could be putting the green banner on LinkedIn. It could be reaching out to recruiters. So you've got this inbound flow of opportunities whilst you work on the more proactive approach. And I think that what we like to say is like it's reverse recruiting, right? You're researching the type of companies that fall within your ideal job profile, and then you rank them by, I guess, factors that mean they're more likely to be hiring your job. And that could be, you know, open positions clearly is something that's obvious, but you could look at stuff like funding. You could look at growth. On LinkedIn, there's an insights button where you can see how fast the company's growing. The volume of open positions just broadly across a company typically means, you know, how well they're doing or how much they're hiring. So those are things that you can use to rank, you know, your job search. And then once you find the right contacts in those companies, as Ahmed said, think about, do you know someone who can intro you? Warm intros, you know, really increase the probability of you getting your foot in the door. So I think that's a really good thing to do as a first port of call. And then if not, shoot people a connection request, an in-mail, an email. I saw someone comment in the chat, how do we feel about reaching out to hiring managers directly? Ultimately, the hiring manager is most invested in this role getting filled with the right person. Right? The recruiter's obviously helping and supporting, but if the hiring manager hears from someone who they think is a great fit, they're going to want to speak to you. So I definitely wouldn't be put off speaking to a hiring manager directly. They might pass you back to the recruitment team, but to be honest, that's what you probably want. You know, if a hiring manager backs you back to the recruitment team, then the recruiter is going to be more likely to schedule you and rush you through the process. Because they don't want to disappoint the hiring manager. So I think that's a really good approach. And I actually think if you're reaching out to a chief product officer or someone, a VP of product, and you have the right fit, they're more likely to get back to you. So because they're not, you know, dealing with lots of different roles and scurrying around trying to fill lots of different positions. So I think that's a good way. I also would say that don't give up after your first message. I think sometimes we limit our own success by making assumptions. I'm going to be bothering this person if I message them more than one time. But what we see, there's a platform called Gem, which is a recruiting email sequencing tool. And essentially they looked at 750 outreach campaigns. And what they found is one email generates a 15% reply rate, 2 emails is 26%, 3 emails 31%, and 4 emails 35%. So do not call it a day after one email. The likelihood is they've just not seen it and it's in their inbox floating around somewhere. So I'd be persistent, and until someone tells you to stop it or gives you an answer, just keep going. In my opinion, you're not going to lose the job for being keen. So I think that, yeah, I'd say being really structured and thinking about it like a go-to-market for your own profile.
That's a great series of stats. I love that. Thank you. I'm going to roll into the community, the questions in the chat in just a moment. Were there any other resources, links you wanted to share, or other insights, Chris, before we go into the chat questions?
Not really. I can share. I saw someone as well mention in the chat about AI, and I've got some links I can share about that and some opinions. But really, I think a lot of it's been what Tom Ahmed resonated with me. You know, I think the number one thing about interviewing is practice, right? I'm still really surprised at how people think they can just rock up to an interview and smash it. You know, it's actually a skill to be good at interviewing. And we all know that having like an elevator pitch is great for a product. You know, you want to have a succinct elevator pitch that shows off the product, you know, its key features and competitive advantages, but we don't think about our own personal elevator pitch. You know, and we know that we're going to get asked in an interview, tell me a bit about yourself and your background. But I'd hazard a guess that most people in this chat have not actually practiced their own personal elevator pitch. So I think just having, you know, a structured way of answering questions and practicing before your interview will just give you a much better chance, I would say. And then lastly, I think follow it with a note. I think that's a really underestimated, like, easy way to stand out that not a lot of people do. You know, this market is incredibly competitive, and I think one of your objectives should be, you know, stand out from the competition. Out of everyone I interview, and I probably have interviewed thousands of people at this point, you know, less than 5% send a follow-up note. So that's almost always going to, you know, make you stand out, and it's very low effort. I think it's, you know, you just should put that into your process as standard, I would say.
Great, thank you. I can really echo that point about practice as well. I started talking to people who were getting roles at big tech companies, places like Meta, and I was absolutely blown away by the amount of practice they were putting in to their interviews. They were doing 40 to 60 hours prep for like one company in big tech, like their process. So it was like a lot. Cool. Loads of questions here. I'm going to try and get through as many as possible that look interesting, but please do kind of keep sticking them in if you've got interesting questions. Chris, I think one for you. Someone was asking about whether you see AI playing a role in talent acquisition. Are recruiters using those kinds of tools? And if so, how should candidates kind of think about, again, kind of navigating that?
Yeah, so I think there's a misconception to some degree of how much AI is playing a part in recruiting at the moment. Like, I think a lot of people might think that their resume is being scanned by some kind of AI software and then giving advice on who is the best person for the role. And that's simply just not the case. I've not seen any software that does that. And actually, New York just passed a law last year that made it illegal for AI software to make suggest who is good for a role. So, and I can share that legislation. And I think it's going to be picked up by a lot of different states in the US and probably Europe as well, as they tend to lean on the side of being employee friendly. I think that what AI will bring to recruitment teams is like a supercharger effect to drive efficiency. So a lot of the administrative work that recruiters do in terms of reaching out to candidates or finding the right candidates, moving them through the process, scheduling interviews, all of that stuff will be automated to free them up for the more kind of human person-to-person interaction. But I really don't think it's going to be in a place to make like real decisions on people for the foreseeable future.
Okay, super. Good to know. And Tom, Ahmed, were you using any AI tools in your search?
Ahmed?
Tom?
I was not. I looked into I can't remember what it's called, but I looked into email sequencer tool at the start. It's not really AI, but automates the process. Didn't find it very helpful, to be honest. And I think for me, I just felt like I needed that personal outreach. And I wasn't blitzing applications. I had a fairly kind of focus of companies. So no, essentially.
Super.
Two use cases. One is just copy editing, very basic. So like dump the CD, see if you have typos, and if there are like better ways to word something in particular. Two, if you're sending like a LinkedIn message or something, maybe like you also give it to ChatGPT to make it like more concise or whatever your goal is. And the second use case is actually sometimes like the product thinking. So you can say like, here's kind of what I'm thinking about. Can you give me all the UX metrics that you can think about in a particular use case? And surprisingly, actually have things that you might have not thought about, and sometimes also hallucinates and it gives you stuff that are not useful. But yeah, so I think these are the two use cases.
Yeah, you've actually reminded me. You can use ChatGPT for product management interviews. Just chuck in an interview question, and it'll give you a good answer, or you can chuck in a good answer and it'll ask you to grade it, or you can ask it to grade it.
Interesting. Great. So a question from Jen here, because I know both of you, Tom and Ahmed, you both switched industries. She's asking, like, how do you do that? Like, if you kind of find yourself stuck in an industry you don't want to be in, how do you make the transition? Maybe we start with Ahmed on this one.
I think the way to do it is to figure out what is the overlap. So I moved adjacent industry, but basically I went into maybe a larger HR, payroll, and fintech company, but I also I sold my payroll background and it was relevant enough for them to like make the move. So I think that would be the way that I would recommend doing that, like going for something a bit more generalist. And I'm also not placed on the most technical stuff either. I'm placed on my skill set, which is more generalist and less so like as an SME. So you just need to figure out what the overlap is, and hopefully that's enough for the hiring manager.
Yeah, similar. I have it's about cross-transferable skills, right? So for the role that I'm in now, they were actually specifically looking for payments experience, but because I had done a outreach on LinkedIn, and had that conversation with the hiring manager, she was able to understand that actually maybe I was better at product craft and not so good at the payment space, which I could pick up anyway. So don't discount yourself because it's a completely different space. I'm sure you've got skills that can be transferred over.
Great. Chris, I think a couple here for you on fractional roles. Someone was asking, where can you find those, and what are the advantages of fractional roles, if any?
Yeah, so I would say, fractional roles are typically for a defined project of work. I think that, if this project might be, 6, 8, 12 months, they'll avoid hiring, someone permanent, and they'll bring in a fractional person. I think the benefits to fractional for folks is if you like going in and, working on a very defined project, making an impact and leaving. I know some people don't like the BAU work that sometimes happens in companies. So I think that is, if that appeals to your personality type and what you enjoy doing, that's great. I also think it allows people to build a portfolio career over time, which there's an argument for really accelerates your learning and your experience because you're constantly going into new environments, different companies, working with different teams, and maybe different tools and technologies. So it can really accelerate your learning. In terms of where to find them, LinkedIn, job search, you can find them there. People will be hiring for contract roles. It's definitely, I feel, from what I'm seeing, UK versus US, it's a bit more popular in the US at the moment. I think there's still a connotation around contract work in the UK that it's a bit volatile and it's maybe unsafe or unsustainable or it's risky. Whereas in the US, people don't feel like that because they're on at-will contracts anyway. People can be terminated at any point with no notice period in the US. So a contract role is just as risky for them as a permanent role in a lot of ways. I think it is becoming more popular in the UK, and people are seeing, with the gig economy and people are wanting to take control of their roles and have side hustles. They're thinking of ways to build their own businesses. But I think it's still seen as maybe a bit risky in the UK versus the US.
Awesome, thank you. And then question back to Tom and Ahmed, and maybe Tom, you can answer this one first. Could you just run through the numbers in your funnel again? Like how much time were you spending on your job search? Sort of each week, for how long, and then very roughly, what did that turn into in terms of applications, coffee chats, interviews, etc.?
It's a very broad question. So I was between roles. So I don't want to say it was a full-time job because I think that can get pretty stressful pretty quickly. And actually, if I did this, so it took me 2-3 months. If I did this again, I would make sure that I put in like holidays where I would actually just step away for a bit. And then I kind of saw it as phases. So when I started, I was like, right, month 1 will be like loads of outreach, really broad, just to get a feeling of the market. If I did this again, I don't think I would have to do that, or I would at least shorten it. And then it got me the first kind of round of interviews so I could really refine things for month 2 and 3. I don't know numbers. I'd say it's probably 20 to 30 hours a week, but that seems a lot. But it's all, and like I appreciate not everyone is between roles. Just send one message a night. Like if you have LinkedIn, there's no harm in just pinging someone. You might not get a response, and that's kind of the fear that you have. Like, where's the harm in it? So yeah, don't be disheartened by like really big numbers like 20 to 30 hours. I know Ed, you talked about like Fang, it takes 40, 60 hours. I think that can be quite overwhelming, but it's just like, just do like 1 hour of that. That's no big deal. It's going to make you a better person. So
yeah, and I guess that there's a, if you're out of work, then probably the pressure is on to get a role as well as you've got the time, right? So whereas if you're in a role, even if you want to change, maybe you don't like your current role, you do still have that current job to give you a bit of financial security, so you can take a bit longer over the process.
Yeah.
Ahmed, how about you? Do you have any sense of those numbers in your case?
I do, because I send them on the Hustle Badger community, so I have them on Slack. So applications is hard for me to remember, but I said maybe 50, 100. I don't know. It's hard to count, to be honest. But I think first round invites, I had 8. And eventually I got 2 offers. So if you think about the funnel, then I have about 8 like first round invites. 5 of them were from cold applications, 1 from a headhunter, and 2 from referrals. I then basically dropped out of 3, got rejected in 3, and got offers from 2. And that's kind of like what the funnel looks like. I think from a preparation perspective, I think there's work that you have to do for the interview that you can't really like sort of like shave off. So I'd say I was also full-time. So I think I tried my best towards the end to have some proportional measure of an interview process. So like if this is half an hour with the hiring manager of a tier 1 company, I would spend 2 to 3 hours and I'll get it, pitch perfect. If it's half an hour with a tier C company, I'm gonna give it an hour just to give it like the right effort, or like maybe another half an hour. So something like this. Cases, honestly, I went for an overkill, right? Like I was super keen on the opportunities that I had. And I would say that like in preparation for a case, either because it's a take home or it's gonna be a live case, I'd say I put decent 10 hours plus on prepared cases. And for the live cases that are like generic that you can prepare for, maybe also like 10 hours. But at least these are 10 hours that you can always reutilize. You don't have to do them again. But the specific for a particular take home task, I think this you just have to do it as you encountered. But in my experience, a lot more companies are doing live cases than they are doing take home tasks, which is good for on the whole.
I just looked at my funnel as well. So I got 19 that progressed to at least a recruiter call. So I had 3 that went to a recruiter call and went away. 3 went to first round and then second round. 3 that went to a final round, 3 that I declined at some stage, and then 1 role.
Yeah, I'd echo some of those points about how some of this stuff is reusable. I've basically used the same deck for getting CPO roles at multiple companies, and I've kind of reskinned it and changed some of the content. And the first time I probably spent 2 days on it, and now I turn it around in half a day. This is like half a day for final round interviews to get a CPTO, role. Like these are big jobs, and still like that time is actually going down, and the tech is getting better. And there is also a copy of it on the Hustle Badger website if you want to check it out. I'm gonna kind of pause there as we're basically out of time. I just want to thank again Chris from Talentful for coming along, sharing some of his insights, and then Tom and Ahmed from the Hustle Badger community for sharing their sites. If anyone has follow-up questions or thoughts, please do feel free to reach out to me either on LinkedIn or through Hustle Badger, and I'll do my best to kind of answer those questions. I can definitely see there's a need to put together a list of recruiters and hiring platforms, so I'll put that on my to-do list. And if you are starting a job search, then do check out the Hustle Badger job hunting course. We've had really great feedback on it. I know Tom and Ahmed have both used it, and that does help you kind of think about what you're going after and then how to optimize your search through that funnel we've been talking about. Yes, there will be, I see Gordon posting there will be a recording and a transcript of this. We're going to get that up on YouTube as soon as possible, and I'll be sharing it on my LinkedIn as well. But yeah, thanks once again to the panel. Really, really great to have you here.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for having us. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.